Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're finally ending our Fall of the Han lore series with episode 13, titled Ending with Liu Hong's Death. So we started this lore series talking about the death of an emperor, and it's only fitting that we end with one as well. And in Liu Hong's case, his untimely death will also seal the fate of the entire Han Dynasty, as neither one of his sons would ever truly rule, as they would spend their entire lives living as a puppet emperor. Now, before we officially start this episode, I want to first clear Liu Hong's name a little bit, since we spent a good portion of this lore series talking about how corrupt the Han government was and how greedy Liu Hong was. And while this was all true, we can't really blame him for his actions, as we need to remember that he was but a fatherless kid that was handpicked by a strong regent to become a puppet. Not only that, he was raised by eunuchs who heavily influenced his personality during his most vulnerable years, and he trusted them because in his mind, the eunuchs rescued him from the fate of becoming a puppet emperor under a strong regent. And indeed, if you compare Liu Hong's life to the likes of Liu Zhi, who ruled before him, or Liu Xie, who will rule after him, Liu Hong actually had the most power and self-rule, and he needs to thank his eunuchs for this. So just want to say, the fall of the Han is much more of a systematic issue than Liu Hong's personal issue. Now, all this talk about strong regents brings us to a situation back in the capital that has been brewing since the beginning of the Yellow Turban Rebellion. For Liu Hong, the rebellion was a wake-up call that his empire and country was actually in bad shape, as he has always believed that everything was fine and enjoyed living in luxury. And in response to the imminent threat of approaching Yellow Turban forces to the capital, and the threat of assassination by those in favor of the Yellow Turban within the capital city, he replaced a short-term threat with a long-term one by elevating his brother-in-law He Jin to the position of Grand Commandant and providing him control of the 5,000-man elite imperial army. It made a lot of sense at the time, since He Jin was the least likely person to ever betray him, and the He clan actually owed everything to the emperor, because He Jin's father was a commoner who lived as a butcher, and He Jin's mother actually died quite young, and He Jin's father remarried to give birth to another son and daughter, and this very daughter would grow up to become Empress He. Now, even though Empress He and He Jin are step-siblings, they had a very decent relationship, since their father also died relatively young, and He Jin was forced to pick up the family business as the oldest brother and lived as a butcher to help essentially raise the whole family. So there definitely was a strong bond between this brother and sister combination, and looking at where they came from, the He clan should be very much elated and satisfied, because He Jin is now the Grand Commandant and his stepsister is now the Empress. They really can't go much higher than this. And they were satisfied, as Empress He had nothing to worry about in terms of kids, as she and Liu Hong had a son together named Liu Bian, who also happens to be the oldest son. So inheriting the throne was going to be a very natural event for the He clan, and they were guaranteed to remain in favor for a long time in the future. But Liu Hong had another son, a younger one, named Liu Xie, who was 5 years younger than Liu Bian, and was actually Liu Hong's favorite son, since he showed early signs of brilliance. And secretly, Liu Hong wanted to go against tradition on this one, and wanted to name Liu Xie as his heir in the future. So now you see why having He Jin as the Grand Commandant was becoming a problem for Liu Hong. At first glance, you might think this was going to be a battle between Liu Hong and the He clan, as both Empress He and He Jin would be vested to want Empress He's son Liu Bian to inherit the throne. But in reality, these three characters each represented a different faction, as Empress He herself was quite a force to be reckoned with as well. You don't simply go from a butcher's daughter to the empress, no matter how good you are in the bedroom. In the early years that Empress He entered the court, she would build a strong relationship with the eunuchs in control, who her brother disliked. So while on the matter of inheriting the throne, He Jin and Empress He were definitely on one side, but in regards to issues like the eunuchs and the party incident, Emperor Liu Hong and Empress He was actually in agreement, and He Jin, as a court official, was actually on the side of the scholars, as he hung out with the likes of Yuan Shao and Cao Cao, who are both from powerful clans. But it is also clear that no matter the issue, Emperor Liu Hong and He Jin were on opposite sides. So since Liu Hong can't just strip He Jin of his command of the imperial army without damaging his relationship with his wife, he had to think of new ways to neutralize He Jin. So in August of 188, Liu Hong would name himself as the Grand General of the Han, as he would create a personal army for himself, naming it the 8 Guards of the West Palace, or the Xiyuan Ba Xiao Wei. And the purpose of this army, publicly, was to deal with the increasing number of rebels that have been stirring up the countryside like wildfire, as at the time, both the Liang province in the northwest and the You province in the northeast were both in rebellion. But secretly, the purpose of this army was to neutralize He Jin's force and ensure that Liu Xie would one day be able to inherit the throne. So Liu Hong picked out 8 generals to become his 8 guards, and he ranked them 1 through 8 as listed here. Now right away, 2 names jump out the page, as Yuan Shao and Cao Cao were 2nd in command and 4th in command. But more noteworthy here is that the commander of this entire unit, whose name is Jian Shuo, and he is most noteworthy because he is a eunuch. Now he wasn't one of the 10 eunuchs, which is actually 13 people, but he was a relatively younger eunuch that became a trusted member of Emperor Liu Hong's group, and he was very loyal to the emperor, and the emperor had counted on him to be able to use this army upon his own death to basically kill off He Jin and put Liu Xie onto the throne. And to not make this purpose so apparent, Liu Hong picked Yuan Shao and Cao Cao, who are both very friendly with He Jin, to also have a high command in this new army. And another name that's popped out here is Feng Feng, and he is the father of Lady Feng, who is the wife of Yuan Shu, who is Yuan Shao's half-brother. So technically, he can be considered a relative of the Yuan clan as well. So Liu Hong definitely picked out some balanced roster to host his army, but he put his most trusted man at the top. Now, this time, I feel like we need to finally properly introduce Yuan Shao, who had been largely absent from our story so far. Even though we have mentioned countless times before in our other lore series on the channel that the Yuan clan was a very powerful and respected clan during the later stages of the Han Dynasty. In their last 3 generations, 4 Yuan clan members have been promoted to the title of Grand Excellency, so they definitely had a large amount of political capital and connections to get all their kids into high government positions. But for the longest time, Yuan Shao had been just a civilian, and this was largely because he didn't want a government job while the eunuchs were in full control after the last 2 party incidents. So Yuan Shao avoided all the chaos at court by using his mother's death to excuse himself from politics, saying that he needed to spend 3 years guarding her tomb. Now, while this sounds very absurd today, guarding the tomb of your parents was a very common practice in ancient China, which valued filial piety as well as ancestral worship. And it was an excellent excuse to get out of work, while showing a large amount of filial piety that would actually provide you with extra political capital once you return to work. So Yuan Shao actually guarded his mother's tomb for 3 years as he waited out the party incident. And after seeing that the eunuch have won, he requested the government to extend his tomb guarding for another 3 years, since when his father died, he wasn't able to guard his tomb. So he wanted to make up for that now. So that's why Yuan Shao had been largely absent from our lore so far, as he took a 6-year vacation guarding his parents' tomb. And this excuse actually got Yuan Shao very famous as a very filial piety Confucian example for many to follow, and actually attracted a lot of scholars to visit him at the time. But this was in fact a cover that many scholars used at the time to visit Yuan Shao, and they worked out an alliance, a secret network of allies that included the likes of Cao Cao, Zhang Miao, Tian Feng, Xu You, and many, many more, as they debated how to revenge the scholar class and kill off all the eunuchs. And the eunuchs weren't dumb, and they realized that these scholars who frequently visited Yuan Shao's residence was not really there to study his filial piety, so they definitely wanted to stop Yuan Shao. But the Yuan clan was too powerful, as one of their uncles, Yuan Wei, was currently the Grand Excellency at the time. So instead of just making a move on Yuan Shao, they politely invited Yuan Wei to a meeting and asked him to kindly warn Yuan Shao to rein him back in before he makes the wrong move. And this alone shows how respected and powerful the Yuan clan was, as even the 10 eunuchs were afraid to just straight up arrest Yuan Shao, and had to basically beg Yuan Wei to control his nephew. And this is really a credit to Yuan Shao's brilliant move, since tomb guarding had 3 huge advantages. 1, he couldn't be forced to work in government during this period, so the eunuchs can't create any situation to punish him like they did for Lu Zhi and Huang Fusong. 2, he had the freedom and excuse to build allies as he stayed at home to honor his dead parents. And 3, most importantly, his act of guarding his parents' tomb for over 6 years actually earned him a great reputation as a good kid and an example for all Confucian scholars to follow, which only made him more untouchable and respected. But finally, at the end of the 6 years, the emperor's summon ended Yuan Shao's little act, as he now suddenly became second in command of the emperor's personal army. So you see, guarding your parents' tomb does pay off at the end. Yet, Liu Hong's efforts would be in vain, as in May of 189, barely a few months after the formation of this new armed force, Liu Hong would die at the age of 33 from natural causes before he could actually declare any of his younger son as officially an heir. So naturally, the older son, Liu Bian, would ascend to the throne. But the army was still there, and Jian Shuo knew exactly what the emperor had wanted, so he went to discuss plans of switching the emperor with his superiors in Zhao Zhong and Zhang Rang, who led the 10 eunuchs. But these 2 eunuchs didn't want to switch emperors, as they were allies with Empress He, so they told Jian Shuo to stay put. Jian Shuo, however, was fiercely loyal to Liu Hong, and decided that he must go on with the late emperor's plan. And this made the 10 eunuchs very uneasy, as they liked the current situation, so they decided to betray Jian Shuo, as they informed Empress He of the whole situation, and very quickly, He Jin arrived with the imperial army and killed off Jian Shuo before he could even make a move. And all of a sudden, Liu Hong's private army, designed to put Liu Xie onto the throne, became Yuan Shao's army. And since Yuan Shao was a friend of He Jin, so this was basically now He Jin's army too. And if you observe the power distribution within the capital after Liu Hong's death, now you had 2 powerful forces. One side, you had Empress He and the eunuchs as a powerful force within the imperial palace, and within the imperial court, you had He Jin as the most powerful military commander, Yuan Wei as the most influential scholar official at the time, and lastly, you had Yuan Shao, who was a little bit from both the military world and the scholar world. And Yuan Shao, with his relationship to both He Jin and Yuan Wei, made him quite a powerful figure at a young age in court as well. So Yuan Shao tried to use this relationship as he tried to convince He Jin to finally make the move against the eunuchs, who are now without any real military support. But the problem is, now He Jin was a little bit torn. On a personal level, he hated the eunuchs just as much as Yuan Shao and the powerful clans, but they did help him when they informed him about Jian Shuo's planned coup, and they also supported Liu Bian to become the emperor. And his sister also been actively trying to convince him to not kill the eunuchs, who are friends with her. So seeing that He Jin wasn't going to do it himself, Yuan Shao started to have other ideas, as he now tried to convince He Jin to start inviting regional military forces to converge onto the capital to strengthen their position. But secretly, Yuan Shao wanted to team up with these regional forces himself to kill off the eunuchs, since He Jin is hesitant to make the move. And this plan worked, as He Jin agreed to Yuan Shao's advice, as he wanted to strengthen his own force as well, and invited tons of regional forces to converge onto the capital. Now, the most famous of these forces included Dong Zhuo, and Dong Zhuo was really crafty here, as he marched a much larger force than requested near the capital, but he didn't enter to join He Jin's army, as many of the other regional forces did, because he was seeking an opportunity for himself. At this point, Dong Zhuo had largely fell out of favor with the court, since he took part in the last failed offense inside the Luoyang province, so he knew this was likely his last chance of glory, and he wanted to first make sure he was on the winning side. So he camped outside the capital and waited. And as different forces poured into the capital, the eunuchs knew what was going on. So they had to act fast and move first before He Jin made up his mind. So they kindly asked Empress He to summon her brother He Jin into the imperial palace to talk things over, which she did without knowing that they were actually planning to kill him. And He Jin didn't suspect much because he felt he was in full control, and bolstered by the increasing number of regional forces that he was absorbing, he felt that he was untouchable, and he couldn't have imagined that the summon by his own sister was going to be an assassination attempt. So he wrote to the imperial palace with Yuan Shao and Cao Cao in tow, who both actually were worried for his life, as they took guards with him to escort him to the palace gate. And at the gate, the palace guards blocked their entrance, only allowing He Jin to enter, which made sense, since He Jin was going to the palace to meet the Empress Dowager, and you can't have all these men going into the imperial palace to see the Empress Dowager. So He Jin walked in alone, and as soon as he stepped into the imperial palace, the gate was shut, and eunuchs swarmed out armed with axes waiting for him, as they didn't want to talk, and simply hacked him into pieces. Waiting outside, Yuan Shao and Cao Cao grew more and more nervous as time passed on, when they finally started to shout into the palace asking for He Jin to respond. Then to their surprise, He Jin's head was thrown over the wall as the guards told him that He Jin had tried to assassinate the young emperor and had been killed on the spot. Knowing that the eunuchs were behind this, they rallied their men and stormed the palace, killing every single eunuch they could find. And seeing that Yuan Shao and Cao Cao had basically gone mad, Zhao Zhong and Zhang Rang grabbed the young emperor and his younger brother and fled outside the capital, only to bump into Dong Zhuo's waiting arms. And with the capital in chaos following Yuan Shao and Cao Cao's brash act of revenge, the leaderless imperial forces were quickly absorbed by Dong Zhuo as he marched into the capital as the savior of the emperor. And even though officially the Han Dynasty would not end until the year 220, when Cao Pi finally usurped the throne, we all know that the moment He Jin's head flew over the palace walls and Dong Zhuo marched into the capital with the child emperor under his control, the fall of the Han was now complete. And with that, we will end our lore series. But for those of you who still thirst for more stories about this period, fear not, as I plan to start a new series very soon that will feature Dong Zhuo's life exclusively, as squeezing him into this one would not do him any justice. So hope you guys enjoyed this series, and see you all next time. Bye!